You know what? Let's just dive right into this tutorial. If you're new here, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield, and right now we're inside Blender. Blender is a free, open source 3D production workflow software. I mean, it does a lot of things, but for us, we're primarily going to be using it for 3D modeling for 3D printing. And today, our tutorial is going to focus on creating the structure of this little book here that you can use then for decorating your miniature bases. This is a great way to get started with resin printing, or modeling for resin printing anyway, because we're going to be doing a fairly small piece. The Stormcast emblem on top here, well, that's a separate video I have. You can find a link to that in the show notes, so you can go ahead and follow that tutorial, come back and add that little emblem onto the book, or whatever faction of your choice that you would like to make. So, if you don't have Blender, this, like I said, is a free program. You can head over to blender.org and download it. And let me just run through the interface a little bit, then we'll get to work here. So, you left click to select on things. You can see in general, when you got something selected, it has an orange outline to it. If you hold down the middle mouse button and move around, that's how you kind of circle around your view. That's what I've been doing all along here. You can scroll in with the mouse wheel to zoom in, scroll out to zoom out. If you hold down Shift and the mouse wheel, you can pan around like this. And I should point out, this is some software where you really need a mouse. Blender is not a trackpad friendly program, and it's not a touchscreen friendly program either. Well, for the most part, there's some things you can do with it, like Surface Pro, you do some cool stuff. But for the most part, you really need a mouse and a keyboard. And it helps to have a keyboard with a numpad. Those are the numbers off to the far right of the keyboard, because you can use those to jump around the view relatively quickly. So for example, pressing 1 will jump you to a front view, 3 a side view, 7 a top view, and then what's important to note is 5 changes between perspective and orthographic mode. For example, when perspective is enabled, you can kind of see how the back side of the cube there is a little bit smaller than the front side, because that's how perspective works. Orthographic, you lose that depth perception. This is normally how I work under most circumstances, and that's toggled with 5 on the numpad. Now, if you don't have a numpad, and you still want to use these cool jump around things, do a Google search for Blender 2.8 Emulate Numpad. That'll give you the instructions how you can use the number keys to function like the numpad. So that's great if you're working on something like a laptop. Okay, let's get started with the tutorial. So let me just hide my completed book over here. And I'm going to click on our default cube. So if you just open up Blender, you should see something kind of like this, where you have a cube, a camera, and a light. I'm going to ignore the light and the camera. So to get into wireframe mode, press Z and then drag your mouse off to the left. This basically is like an X-ray vision mode, and you can see through your objects. Oftentimes this can be helpful in modeling. In fact, I do a lot of modeling in wireframe mode. So now as we get started, you're going to see in the lower left hand corner, those are the keys that I'm pressing in case I don't happen to call them out. But let's jump to the top view. And then we're going to left click on our default cube right here. I'm going to press N, and that's going to bring up some options on the right hand side over here. And if it's not already selected, click on Item. And we're going to change the dimensions value of this object. So we're going to set our basic size of our book. And now all these numbers are in millimeters. I know they say meters, but these are in millimeters, because that's just how Blender, when outputs a 3D printing format, it works. You can change that if you want to mess around with it, but for me, I just do it in my head and everything's happy. So X is going to be the width of the book, Y is going to be kind of the height of the book, and Z represents the thickness of the book. So I'm just going to punch in some numbers, 8 for X, Y for 11, let's do 4 for Z. And as I scroll around here, you can see I've got a bit of a thick rectangle. And this is going to be the basic shape of our book. Now before we start doing details, there's one important thing about sculpting miniatures. From whether it's this or something even more complex like a cool monster, for miniatures you need to exaggerate detail. So this thing here is not going to be an actual scale model of a book, scaled down to really tiny size. The details like the thickness of the cover, some of the other things are going to be more exaggerated. That way you can actually see those when you print them. If you try to make this thing actual scale, the details are going to be so small that when you print it, you're not going to be able to see the pages, and it's just not going to look very good at all. So what we need to do is, the pages now, they're obviously a little bit smaller than the cover. So we got to cut them out, or basically make the kind of middle area of this cube be a little bit smaller than the cover. Now, how you'd accomplish this in Blender is, what we're going to do is essentially create an object that represents the empty space, or the negative space between the cover and the pages. You'll see this in a moment here. But to carve areas out of an object in Blender, you do what's called a Boolean Operation. This is a 3D geometry operation. So what I need to do is create an object that represents the area that we're going to remove. Alright, so I'm going to jump back to the top view here, numpad 7, Shift D, and that's going to duplicate an object. You can see I'm moving around right here, so I've just made an exact copy of our basic book object. Now I'm going to press X, and what this does, it now locks the movement onto the X axis. So I am going to move this object over to the right a little bit, and I want these two things to be overlapped, the distance that you want the difference to be between the pages of the book and the cover of the book. Now, just so you guys know, each one of these little squares in the background is 1 millimeter. So let's do, this is a really tiny thing, so let's, like I said, make it a little exaggerated. So I'm gonna, I think we'll be alright. We can probably be alright with a 1 millimeter overlap. Now I'm gonna jump, there we go, I'm gonna jump to the front view. And now I'm going to scale this guy in the Z-axis, so scale Z. And now you can see I'm making it smaller along the height. And what you want to do is you want to leave a little bit of space for the size of the cover. So you can kind of imagine your object is selected in white right now. The book is in the black. So the differences between where the top of the white is and the top of the black there, that's going to be the thickness of the cover. So I'm going to say, that looks pretty good, about 1/2 millimeter. So your cover is going to be that thickness right there. I'm going to jump back to the top. And now I am going to press S for scale and then Y. I'm going to scale this object in the Y direction. So you can see I'm making it bigger this way. And what you'll see what I'm going to do in a moment here. I'm just making it bigger because it's part of the whole mathematical operations thing. Exact size doesn't matter. So what we need to do now is expand the object so that it kind of runs something like this, right? Because we need to cut out an area underneath the cover as to where the difference between the pages and the cover is going to be. I have a feeling you're a little bit confused about all this because this is kind of, we're diving already into some of the more detailed aspects of Blender. Once I get these few steps done, it'll make probably a little bit more sense. And you can kind of jump back to the start of this and then run through it again. You'll probably get an idea of what's exactly going to be happening. Now, I'm going to press Tab to jump into edit mode. So these things that are on the screen now are called meshes. They're kind of the basic element of Blender. And if I hit Tab now and go into edit mode, you're going to see a mesh is made up of 3 things. These little points here, those are called vertices. You have edges, which are these lines that connect 2 vertices together. And then where you've got a face, which is several vertices and edges that are combined to form an enclosed space, that's basically an outside area of the mesh. There we go. Throw some 3D geometry at you. I'll be honest with you, Blender's a bit of a beefy program, and we're condensing it down. Just trust me on this. It'll make sense here in a moment. We're going to do something called a loop cut. So I'm going to press Control R, and let's see if I can get it right. So move your mouse cursor around a little bit. You see a yellow line just appeared there. This is going to be an area where we're going to basically add some more what's called geometry. So we're going to add some more vertices, we're going to add some more edges, and we're going to split some faces. But what I want to do is press up on the scroll wheel, and now I've got 2 of them. Immediately left click once, left click again, and you can see here now I've got a new set of vertices and edges in here. So if I press A to select everything, you can see now there's more little dots making up this object than there was before. This is going to give us more flexibility and basically expand the shape of this object in very interesting ways. Alright, so let me jump back to our top view, numpad 7. I'm going to left click outside the box a few times, and then that's going to clear all my selection. So no part of this box right now is selected. I'm going to use something called the box select. I'm going to press B, and you can see I got these little crosshairs formed. And I'm going to select these two edges, or these two edge loops we just created here. So you can see I've got these two inside sets of vertices selected, but the outside ones are not. Now, just like with objects, you can manipulate individual vertices. So I can press scale Y, S then Y, and then you can see I can scale these vertices apart along the Y-axis. So we need to scale them so that the difference between this line and the edge of the book kind of represents the difference between the size of the cover and the size of the pages. Once I get it to about where I want, I'm going to press left click to select that. And even though I didn't really change the shape of this object, you'll see in a moment here, what I did do is I changed some options for how we manipulate this object. Okay, I'm going to left click twice outside the object, clear my selection, and now what I am going to do is do something called a face select. So in the upper left hand corner you have a couple little buttons up here. One's currently selected. Go 2 over and you want to hover over this guy and choose face select. And now what we can do is I can click right here, and that selects this side of this mesh. Hold down shift and left click over here until that gets selected. So now I have 2 of these faces selected. And what's going to happen, I'm going to press the key E. Now E stands for extrude. What extrusion does is it takes what you have selected and pretty much pulls it out from the mesh that it's currently part of and adds on to the structure. So I press E, and you can see now what I'm doing, and I'm turning what was this mesh into a bit of a large U-shaped structure. Alright, so I want to pull these faces out to where they're almost to the edge of the book, because the difference here between this line and this line represents the binding of our book, or the outer cover. Alright, so that was really a mess of a confusion thing, wasn't it? Welcome to Blender. Take a moment to save your book, by the way. So Control S to save. Blender 2.8 is relatively stable, but every now and then something might go wrong. Now, what you can see here, if I select our original book, the object we just created here, this U-shaped structure, it's overlapping the outside edges of this block. So what we're going to do is do a mathematical operation that says, take this block here, subtract the overlapping areas from this block, or this U-shaped object, and what that's going to do is it's going to basically create some insets that run along this original block here, and it's going to make it look like the pages of the book are inset from the cover. Okay, so first thing you want to do is you want to get in a habit in Blender of naming your meshes and your objects. So in the right hand side here, there's a little button that's probably already selected that has like a square with 4 little corner lines around it. Hover over it, it's context object. You want to select that with your book selected, and then where it says cube, click there, and I'm just going to type in the word book because I'm going to give this object a name. Now I'm going to click on our other thing we created, the U-shaped structure, and we're going to give it the name called page cutout. Then let's click on our book again, and we're going to do a Boolean operation finally. So we're going to do the modifiers context. That's the little wrench looking thing right below the one we have selected. Under add modifier, I'm going to choose Boolean. Operation should be difference. Object is going to be the target object, which will be the page cutout. And now you can already see here, if I kind of zoom around with this in effect, now you can see, after all these steps, how our book is actually starting to look a little bit like a book, right? Because you see a cover, and then you see you have some pages that are cut out, and the cover is obviously a little bit bigger than the pages. And like I mentioned before, because this is a miniature, a lot of the detail is exaggerated. The cover and the binding, well, they're obviously a little bit thicker than they need to be than a real book would be, but it's all about selling that effect when you have a finally printed up tiny little piece. To make this permanent, click on Apply, and then we can click on our U-shaped object here, and I'm going to press H to hide it. That doesn't delete it. It's still up here if you want to go back and get it later, but it's out of the view for now. Hold down Z and move to the right to choose solid, and you can see we've already got something that kind of looks like a book. So hopefully that whole Boolean operation thing kind of makes sense now. And if it does, you can jump back to the start, and hopefully you got a better idea of what I'm doing along those steps to create the end product here. So the next thing we want to do is add some bevel so that the edges of the binding here are curved a little bit, as well as the edges of the cover here are curved also. And that just gives a little bit of character per se to the book and makes it look a little bit more realistic, because right now, well, it's pretty darn blocky. So let's left click on our book once again. I'm going to press Tab to enter in to my edit mode. I'm going to left click 2 times outside the object to deselect everything. And now I want to choose Edge Select Mode. So in the upper left hand corner, where we were before with Face Select, choose Edge Select. It's the middle of those 3 buttons. And I want to click on this edge right here, which I didn't actually succeed. There we go. Now turn white. Hold down Shift and then left click on the other one below it. So I have the top and the bottom of the edges of the binding selected, right? So now I'm going to press Control B, that's for bevel, and immediately left click once. Nothing happened, right? Well, we're going to show you something kind of cool down here. In the lower left hand corner, you can see there's this little object right here that says bevel. Click on that, and this stupid thing is going to be over all the options. But these are all the options you can do for the bevel. And for certain operations like bevel, instead of trying to visually do it over here in the screen, changing these numbers can often get you better control. One of these options is called width. It's the second one. Let's click on the little arrow that appears on the right hand side of the box. We'll click on that a few times. Just keep clicking on it every now and then. And you can see you're starting to get a little bit of a beveled edge there. Now it's just like an angle cutoff, but we'll fix that in a minute because we're trying to get approximate size. That's probably a little bit too much. So I'm going to hit the arrow on the left hand side. That looks pretty good right there. Now we want to make it a little bit more curved, right? Because that's just an angle cutoff. So right below it you have segments. So Blender, being that it works only with edges, faces, and vertices, it can't do a true curve. It has to approximate a curve. And what you can do here is by increasing the number of segments, you can see now it's doing a little bit better job of approximating the curve. And if you go up to like 9 segments, that looks pretty darn good. So with that, I think that looks pretty good for a bit of a beveled edge to the book. But, you know, it's your choice. You can kind of do what you want. So let's just left click somewhere out here now, and then that makes that permanent. And we've got a nice little bit of curved edge to that area of the book. We're going to do something similar here to the front corners. So let's click on, let's get that one selected right there, that edge. Shift left click over there for that edge and do the same thing for the bottom 2. And now we're going to press Control B for bevel one more time. Left click. And we got to start playing around with our options over here. I'm going to drop segments down to 5. And I am going to also show you another way to increase the size of your width. So if you hold down your mouse button while it's over the width parameter and move to the right, you can see it increases the size of it. And well, oh dear. All right, so let's take a look at what's happening here. So you'll notice at a certain point, weird things start happening, right? Because with bevel, depending on how your mesh is designed, there's going to be limits where strange stuff starts happening. Like for example here, it can no longer bevel the bottom of the corner, but it can bevel the top, so it starts getting a bit of an angle effect to it. And if you really go crazy, you can see that there's that weird messiness going there. If you ever see that in Blender, something is terribly wrong. What is happening is Mathematically, there are certain 3D objects that can exist in a computer but cannot exist in the real world, and that kind of weird fuzziness is indicating that's what you're making. So if you ever see that, that's probably not going to 3D print. You've created like an MC Escher sketch or something like that is what you're doing. Okay. So what we want to do is we only want to have a little bit of a bevel. We don't want to make it too far to where we start seeing that angled effect. So that's pretty good right there. And then you can always go back and refine it, using the arrow keys. And in case you're curious why you can't actually make the bottom one go as far as the top one is, you can see right here there's the two lines, the side effect of the Boolean operation from earlier. And once you start getting beyond that, that's what's causing the angled effect, because that's as far as Blender can bevel this corner up to these two lines, but the top doesn't have those two lines, so it can go a heck of a lot further. So let's bring it back in line a little bit. That looks pretty good. There we go. So now I've got a little bit of corner there, or now you've got a little bit of a curved corner there, just to give yourself a little bit of a nicer looking edge to your books. Okay, so let's left click somewhere over here, and let's save our book. And now I want to add a little bit of decoration to the cover, just so there's just something else there, because it's kind of a plain book right now. And we're going to introduce you to the most dangerous tool inside Blender when it comes to manipulating a mesh, the knife tool. The knife tool is incredible, but if you screw something up or get a little too crazy with it, total disaster. Alright, let's press numpad 7 to jump to the top. Then let's press Z, go to the left, choose wireframe mode. I want to go back up to vertex select mode in the upper left hand corner here, and then press A to select your entire book. So now everything is selected. Knife select is over here. It's the little thing that kind of looks like you've got a slanted line connecting to a line in the top. Hover over it. It's called knife. Left click on that to select that tool, and your cursor turns into a little knife. And what we're going to do is kind of cut two ribbons. So one ribbon down here in the bottom and one ribbon up here in the top. Now it's important that I'm going to read off some key presses here, and you want to do these exactly, otherwise something screwy is going to happen. So along the bottom here, there's a grid line. You should have a grid line lined up along the bottom here where it's in from the pages a little bit. I'm going to left click over here on that grid line, and then I'm going to press the letter C, and that's going to constrain the knife movement along that grid. Well, it basically constrains the movement along one of the 8 cardinal directions, which should be along this grid line like you see here. Then I'm pressing the letter Z. Now, nothing seemed to change from this view, but what is happening by pressing Z is it's going to cut all the way through the mesh instead of just the top half. So move your cursor all the way through your book. You're going to see a bunch of little green squares. That's what you want to see. And then hit left click. And then now you've got another knife cut coming up here. Let's just hit enter and make sure everything looks correctly. And what you can see now is you've got let's see if I get a good angle of it. You can see now you've got another set of vertices kind of running through your object right here. That was a result of your knife cut. We're going to do that 3 more times. So jump back numpad 7 to the top. Move up one grid line from the bottom. Left click. Same thing. CZ. Go through your entire book. Left click over here. Press enter to complete the process. And then from the top, go to this grid line here, basically the symmetrical one, but on the top of the book, left click, CZ, go through your book, enter, and then one more time, one grid line down. So now, let me actually press Z, jump back to solid mode. So now you can see how you have like those ribbons running through your book. We're going to use those to create a little bit of fancy decoration to your book. Alright, So we're going to jump back to our face select mode in the upper left hand corner right up here. I need to go and select the select box. So we're going to get out of the knife tool in the upper left hand corner, choose select box right there, the little orange dotted thing with the arrow in it. Let's double click the left mouse button over here somewhere to deselect everything. And what we want to do is select the faces of these ribbon we just created. So that guy, and then we want to select, hold down shift, and then select each of these faces right here. That looks pretty good. And then do the same thing along the bottom. Now if you, a few notes here, right? So you notice if you double click on the same face twice in a row, it's going to toggle between a selected and deselect state. And let's say you do something really screwy like that. Oops. Press Ctrl Z, which is undo, and that'll jump you back one step in your selection process. So if you screw up your selection process a little bit, or you do something like this where you click over here and deselect everything, Ctrl Z, and it'll take you back to where you were. Undo in Blender is your best friend 99% of the time. That 1% of the time, it'll ruin everything you did. You'll know when that happens to you. Just be warned. Carry on. Shift left click to select all these right here. Alright, so you want that all the top of the kind of ribbon there. We don't want the sides selected, just the top and the back. And then do the same thing over here. And now what we want to do is just kind of add, I guess we'll make these a little bit thicker than the book. I don't know, there's some kind of weird decoration on the book. I don't know what they are. But just to give this book a little bit of detail. So we're going to press E for extrude. And what you're going to notice is extrusion, even though now you've got like a top face, a bottom face, and a back selected, it can only extrude in one direction. So we're going to move it backwards basically. So let me press 7 to go to numpad 7, press E for extrusion, and you can see I kind of can pull this back a little bit. So I'm just going to pull it back maybe about half of one of these grid squares. That's about a 1/2 millimeter. And you can see we got something really weird going on like that. So let's press numpad 1 to go to our front view. We still have these areas selected. Press S for scale and Z, and now we're going to scale them up along the top, so you know, about 1/2 millimeter. So you got a nice weird thick ribbon locking system, whatever you want it to be. I don't really care, right? And then I'm going to press G. Now G is for grab, if you move things along. Press X along the X-axis and just kind of bring it back in a little bit. And then you know what? Let's also scale Z, bring it down just a tiny bit. So those are a few little steps how you're manipulating those faces to add a little bit of extra 3D shape to your book. Alright, let's press tab to get out of object mode. And now I'm going to show you how I added that emblem to the book. To create the emblem, like I mentioned, I got a second video that kind of builds on a little bit of what we do here and explores some of the curve tools and some of those things you need to create an emblem. So I'll put a link to that video in the show notes. It'll also probably end up in the end screen of this video if you want to just jump right to it that way. But what you're going to do is append that object to this Blender file. So go up to File, choose Append, and then you're going to have to navigate through your directory structure to find that particular Blender file. So I'm going to do that right now. A Blender file then is a collection of folders in itself. So this is actually the Stormcast logo here. We want to go into Object, and you want to find the object you want to import. And I didn't name them like I showed you how to do at the start of this thing. So we have a Bezier curve and a cylinder. I'm pretty sure it's a Bezier curve is what I want to import. So click that, choose Append from Library, and now there's our emblem. Okay, so I'm going to move this over by pressing the G key. I'm going to kind of position it as best I can. Press S for scale, and just kind of scale it down to what I think looks good. Oh, it's actually inside the book right now. We'll deal with that in a moment. I'm going to jump to my wireframe mode, so that's Z, and then move over to the left. And then I'm going to scale it down so that it appears between those two decorative ribbons. And then I'm going to press G and Z and move it up. And there we go. So now the Stormcast emblem is sitting on top of the book. The key thing here is you want to make sure that your appended object is actually at least partially inside the cover of the book. If it's not and it's floating on top of it, that'll cause weird things with your 3D printer. Weird things could happen. I'm going to actually move it over just a tiny bit. That looks pretty good there. And what I want to do now is merge these two objects into one. So I'm going to click on the book, hold down Shift, left click on the emblem, press Ctrl J to join them together, and now they're one object. The last thing I want to do is a little bit of Blender magic math. It's one of those 3D math things that just trust me, you want to do it before you export in STL format. Press Tab on the object that you want to export, press A to select everything, and choose Shift N. You'll probably see nothing happen, but some math stuff happened in the back end that might have got screwed up during your modeling process, and now your thing is happy to export in STL format. Press Tab to get out of edit mode. Make sure your object is still selected here in orange. You want to go up to File, Export, choose STL, and that'll bring you up to your export screen. The key thing here is under the Export STL little drop down, which should be open. If not, click on it to open it up. Choose Selection Only. If you don't choose this and you've got multiple objects in your Blender file, you'll get a whole bunch of crap exported along with your object you want to export. So click that, give it a file name, choose Export STL, open it up in whatever 3D slicer program you use for your printer, and go ahead with printing as normal. And with that, hopefully that gives you a basic idea of how to use Blender for creating gaming miniatures. So I know this is a very simple model to make, but some of the core concepts here, like doing the extrusion, doing the knife tool, the loop cut, manipulating vertices and moving things around, scaling stuff, and especially the Boolean operation for the difference, those things can be used to create some pretty complex mechanical miniatures. So for example here, this is the Aragul Pale Fox Destroyer from my game Legends of Caladagia. And this guy here, this miniature is made pretty much with the techniques I just showed you right there in that tutorial. There's a few extra things that I did that I didn't cover in that, but for the most part, this is a lot of just sticking objects together, shaping things, doing some different Boolean operations, and in the end, you've got yourself a full, high-quality mechanical gaming miniature. Well, with that, I want to thank you guys all for watching. Once again, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. If you like these kind of 3D modeling videos, you want to get some more, a little bit more step up or whatnot in terms of 3D modeling tutorials, hit subscribe here in this YouTube channel. This summer, I have a series about doing some terrain for a new miniatures game coming out that was on Kickstarter. The starter set sold over $70. You can probably figure out what that game might be. I've actually got some of that terrain 3D printed and sitting in front of me right now. That's me tapping on the table. I'm serious, it's actually real and exists. I'm going to be doing plenty more 3D modeling tutorials in the future. But if you'd like to see not only 3D modeling, but of course robotics, got Microflash is just about done here, but I'm going to move it on to a new robotics project, cosplay. We got to finish on my Fallout 4 laser rifle, and finally get back to my Halo Marine. Yes, I did not abandon that project. I am going to finish that. It just ran out of time last year for Halloween, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to stop talking. Thanks for watching, and have a great week.